Welcome to Tucker Carlson tonight. Donna Brazile exposed a secret arrangement between Hillary Clinton's presidential campaign and the Democratic National Committee. You heard from her last night on this show. But tonight, a campaign finance expert will tell us that that arrangement between the DNC and the Hillary campaign may have violated federal law. We've got details on that ahead. But first this, in 1994, executives from the 7 largest tobacco companies in America were summoned to Congress to explain themselves. In their testimony, the executives said that smoking cigarettes was not addictive. They were lying. They'd known all along about nicotine addiction, yet they continued to sell cigarettes. It was too lucrative to stop. Millions died as a result. Eventually, a wave of lawsuits forced the tobacco companies to admit that they knew this and to shell out hundreds of billions of dollars to victims and their lawyers. Suppressing smoking became a national priority. America understood that hurting people in order to get rich was wrong. Doing it on purpose is criminal. All of which raises serious questions tonight about Silicon Valley, about what their products are doing to this country, particularly to children, and how much tech executives know about the potential harm caused by what they're selling. Already, psychiatric research has produced some ominous findings on this. Social media use is connected to anxiety, depression, and social maladjustment, particularly among adolescents. The more time kids spend online, the unhappier they are. Data from the CDC show that suicide rates for teen girls in America are at a 40-year high, and they're way up for teen boys as well. Does technology play a role in those deaths? And for that matter, in a number of other serious pathologies that appear to be rising in America? Sean Parker seems to think so. Parker is not a research scientist. He's even more authoritative on this subject. He was Facebook's first president, and he helped design that website. Parker just gave a remarkable interview to a reporter from Axios, in which he admits that he and other Facebook founders knew from the very beginning they were creating something harmful and addictive.
We need to sort of give you a little dopamine hit every once in a while because someone liked or commented on a photo or a post or whatever. It's a social validation feedback loop. It's exactly the kind of thing that a hacker like myself would come up with, because you're exploiting a vulnerability in human psychology. And I think that the inventors, creators, and it's me, it's Mark, it's Kevin Systrom at Instagram, it's all of these people, understood this consciously, and we did it anyway.
This is a bombshell. Imagine if the Sackler family, makers of the painkiller OxyContin, admitted they knew their product was likely to addict millions of Americans to opiates, but, quote, did it anyway. Now, that's pretty much exactly what happened with OxyContin, by the way. But so far, the Sacklers have been wise enough not to say so in public. Sean Parker isn't quite so guarded. In his conversation with Axios, Parker repeatedly describes Facebook like an addictive drug, which, of course, functionally it is. When he and his partners designed their product, Parker says they kept one question in mind, quote, how do we consume as much of your time and conscious attention as possible? The answer they found was with a steady stream of dopamine hits to your brain in the form of likes, comments, and new posts. Parker acknowledges Facebook has become an epidemic that is devastating this country. Quote, it literally changes your relationship with society and each other, he said. God only knows what it's doing to our children's brains. Let that sink in. Imagine how you would feel if you actually believed you had injured the brains of millions of children. Sean Parker does not seem especially concerned by this. In fact, in his interview with Axios, he brags about how rich it has made him. Quote, because I'm a billionaire, I'm going to have better access to health care, Parker said. I'm going to be like 160, and I'm going to be part of this class of immortal overlords. You know the expression about compound interest? Give us billionaires an extra 100 years, and you'll know what wealth disparity looks like. The tobacco executives suddenly look decent by comparison. Yet, unlike the heads of Philip Morris and R.J. Reynolds and Laura Lard, Sean Parker and Mark Zuckerberg have not been hauled before Congress to account for themselves and what they've done. Why is that exactly? You'd hate to think it's because Silicon Valley gives far more money to politicians than the cigarette makers ever did, but who knows? Maybe there's a connection. We'll start asking members of Congress about it. And that's not the only newsworthy behavior from Facebook this week. The company is also considering a bizarre plan to have users send them nude pictures of themselves. We're going to let Trace Gallagher handle the details on that. Trace?
Hi, Tucker. Studies show that 4% of internet users have become victims of revenge porn. For women under 30, it's 10%. And the experts say the reason so many ex and angry partners post revenge porn on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter is because it hits close to home, meaning the pictures are accessible to family and friends. So Facebook is launching a pilot program beginning in Australia to help victims fight back. Here's the deal. If you've ever shared nude or sexual images with a partner and you're afraid someday they'll end up on the web, you can send those same images to yourself on Messenger, and then Facebook will go in and make a digital fingerprint of each picture and automatically block any attempt to upload that same image. But there's a catch, and it's a big one. Before Facebook can block your nude pictures, they have to look at your nude pictures. Turns out a crew of specially trained Facebook employees view all the pics, decide if they qualify as revenge porn, and then add the digital fingerprint. Facebook will then keep the pictures on file for an undisclosed amount of time before deleting them. Facebook security says, quote, "We are aware that having people self-report their images carries risk, but it's a risk we are trying to balance real-world harm that occurs every day when people, mostly women, can't stop non-consensual intimate imagery from being posted." Of course, analysts point out that social media companies are just as vulnerable to being hacked as anybody else, which is why experts say the only safe nude photos are the ones that are not taken. Tucker.
Trace Gallagher, thanks a lot. Send naked pictures of yourself to Facebook. Don't do that, by the way. Eric Schiffer is a social media expert and founder of reputationmanagementconsultants.com, and he joins us tonight. Eric, thanks a lot for coming on.
Absolutely. Thank you. Nice to be with you.
So there is mounting evidence, science has produced mounting evidence, that some of the products that Silicon Valley produces hurt people, particularly children, and that there appears to be a direct connection between the time people spend using these products and the condition of their mental health. I'm wondering what Silicon Valley is doing about that. I don't see them doing anything about it, and I'm confused.
Well, you know, I think that those are certainly valid concerns that some have raised in aspects of the community, but there's a whole other side of Facebook, and I think that that's just one. I mean, you can make many of these same arguments with respect to television. You can make them certainly with respect to music. I mean, we've heard these arguments before in history, there's no question. And the truth is, I mean, even a show like yours that's captivating, it's interesting, I mean, it's designed to hold. It's designed to capture people and make them stick, and it does, and it does it well.
If only. I mean, my show and cable news has not totally reordered our society, and I mean, you heard Sean Parker say it. It totally changes the way people deal with one another.
Liberals would think so.
Well, it's not just it's not a liberal conservative thing. Here's the truth. This stuff came out of nowhere, this technology, fewer than 20 years ago, and changed the way we live completely. These are the richest people in our society. They have almost unlimited assets, and they seem to have spent almost no time figuring out what effects their products have on people. And that just seems irresponsible to me, or perhaps I'm missing something.
Well, look, it's capitalism, okay? And I think that when the goal is in any kind of media, and this is a media entity, if you will, it's all about holding people. It's all about capturing people, whether it's television, it's movies, it's music. And I think they have figured it out. But in the brain,
hold on.
it's
Why
the
is
same
that different?
effect.
I mean, first of all, I love how liberals are now defending unrestrained market capitalism because they're profiting from it. But how is that different from selling crack cocaine or heroin? I mean, that's just capitalism, and the whole point is to get people engaged. And so, like, why do you care what the effect is on them? And there's not really an answer, is it?
Well, I think it's certainly an interesting debate. I mean, where do you draw the line? Because you can make the argument that almost anything that holds people and captures people that may have any effect in that way could be negative. And so no one's advocating for drugs. There's no question about that.
Well, but wait a second. Here you have the guy who created the product saying is we knew that this was addictive, we knew it hurt people, and we did it anyway. So we've created this class of child billionaires who apparently knew they were hurting the population when they created the product. I don't understand why there isn't a congressional hearing about this. I mean, if this was a drug, there would be.
Well, I understand, but then what about movies? What about violent video games? Where do you draw the line, Tucker? And so I guess my point in all of this is that when you have a platform like Facebook or television or music, etc., you have to also balance it against the social good. I mean, when you consider Facebook, that's allowed democracy to thrive. I mean, in the Middle East, it took down regimes that were against America.
I know the talking points. Look, but I'm not saying it has no redeeming social value. I'm not arguing that. I'm just saying that underneath the ad copy that you're repeating and the propaganda is another side, and that it appears to have a deleterious effect on the mental health of kids. And I just don't see the people profiting from this taking that seriously at all. Look, if I own a casino, there's an upside to casinos, but I also have to put money aside to fund help for people who are hurt by my products. Same with the cigarette makers, same with the liquor distributors. Why is Silicon Valley exempt just because they give a ton of money to politicians?
Well, I don't think Silicon Valley is exempt, and I don't think that anyone is suggesting that they are. There's no question that no one wants to hurt children, certainly myself, anyone that cares about kids or cares about this country.
Research? How much is Mark Zuckerberg, one of the richest people in human history, how much is he spending to determine the effect of his product on children, and then to help the children who his product is hurting? How much is he spending on that, do you think?
Well, but the same argument is true of television and radio and
television's been around for 70 years.
Music.
We've got a pretty good handle on what television does, and I wouldn't defend a lot of it. But the internet is a totally different experience, and we don't know actually what the effects are. And the point is, these guys don't care because they're greedy, actually. And you just had one of them saying, "Oh yeah, we're hurting people, but I'm a billionaire. I'm going to live to 160." Like what? Why is that okay? That's horrifying behavior, don't you think?
I don't think what you're referencing in terms of a general sense anyone would say is okay. What I think we're trying to do is balance the totality of everything. I mean, for instance, with conservatives, it's possible that without Facebook, Donald Trump wouldn't have been elected president. I mean, the digital director of Trump's campaign as much said the case. So, and conservatives also are using Facebook to thwart
but again,
the mainstream media.
Thing. I mean, Facebook is probably great in Burma. There are lots of things about Facebook that I like. I think there's an upside to Facebook. I'm merely saying there appears to be a massive downside that the company itself is ignoring. There's an upside to cigarettes. They're fun to smoke. They kill you after a while. Do you know what I mean? It's not that there's nothing good about it. It's that there's clearly something really bad about it that the company is hiding.
I don't think there's an upside to cigarettes, in my opinion. But I think that. Yeah, I do see your point, absolutely. And I think that also I'd see the other side. I also see the fact that there's been so much positive, and we have to balance it. That's not to say that Facebook should not be spending more to protect kids, to keep bullying away. And frankly, I think they have done a nice job in that regard.
Bullying displaces the responsibility from themselves onto their consumers. They're saying people are misusing our product. Maybe use of the product itself hurts people. Maybe we should do some research on this. Maybe they should sit in the hot seat in Congress and ask some real questions. But whatever.
Well, I think that's an interesting point. But Tucker, imagine without a Facebook. But imagine without a Facebook.
Well, I grew up without a Facebook.
Where would conservatives
it was actually
be?
Kind of a happy world. No,
you know what?
I was pretty happy before Facebook, I got to say, as far as I remember.
But you yourself benefit from it. You yourself benefit from it. You use it every day.
Doesn't mean there's not a downside. So let's just stop lying and get to the heart of it, to the facts. Thank you, Eric. Tom Kirsting is a psychotherapist and author of Disconnected: How to Reconnect Your Digitally Distracted Kids. There's a title every parent can relate to, and he joins us now. So, Tom, what do we know, and I know this research is in its infancy, but about the effect of social media and screen time on kids?
Well, I could tell you, I've got a litany of information in my book, research-based, and anecdotally, as a therapist, this is basically all I deal with nowadays. I would say I have probably twice as many middle school age kids with major anxiety disorders this year alone in the previous 17 years combined. And I could tie it to social media, electronics, and so forth to a T.
Okay, so I'm 48, so not that old, but I grew up at a time when none of this existed, and it's very obvious, and I'm sure you have the same experience, to me, that a lot has changed. It is not related to our political system or our economy. Something fundamental has changed. How do you draw the connection? Why are you so certain that it's digital media that is doing it?
Well, if you look at it like this, take a kid today. They have a front row ticket to every second of their peers' lives. We didn't have that. We didn't know what our friends were doing down the road. So you give a kid who's a pre-adolescent or an adolescent, and by nature is trying to figure out who he or she is, where they exist in the social pecking order, and now you give them this weapon of mass destruction called a smartphone, and now they're getting feedback constantly, fueling their self-esteem. But it's actually not helping their self-esteem. Because last time I checked, the word self-esteem starts with the word self, not others. And they're getting all of this feedback. And it's really, really destroying our kids. And they're spending 9 hours a day using this stuff. And 9 hours a day of anything, I don't care if it's exercise, even 9 hours of exercise is going to be good for you.
No, that's I think, a wise and true point. So what do you think when you see one of the people who created this product, Facebook, bragging both that he knew it hurt people, he knew it was addictive, but he doesn't care because now he's a billionaire and you're not? Could the leader of any other industry get away with that?
I don't think so. And it's funny because when I give these lectures, I liken this stuff to the tobacco industry back in the day.
Yes.
And how this stuff, and I think we're going to start seeing in the next 3 to 5 years, major shifts going on in our society as this stuff continues to reveal itself. I've been lecturing about this since 2009, so sometimes I feel like I'm the only person out there talking to parents and giving them the information that they need so that they could save their kids. This stuff's stripping us from our relationships with our children as well, because we got our heads down, and every time we catch the moment on our phone, we're missing the moment. We're missing a milestone with our children.
Let me just ask you finally a meta question. This is happening to every person watching right now knows exactly what you're talking about because we're all living it.
Yep.
How is it that 320 million people can be having the exact same experience that's clearly bad and nobody says anything about it? Why isn't this a constant topic of conversation?
It's called social conformity. And if you know what that is, I'm sure you do. Social conformity means we tend to just go like the flock of the birds. If we see everybody else has something, oh, you know what? Every other fourth grader has a smartphone now, so I think I'll get one for my child. Yet in the back of our mind, we know that it's dangerous. So we need to do something. That's why I wrote this book.
Amen. Groupthink is the term we use. Tom, thank you very much.
Thank you, Tucker.
Donna Brazile exposed some genuinely shady behavior at the Democratic National Committee. She may also have inadvertently exposed criminal behavior. That's the claim. We'll talk him into a campaign finance expert who's investigated it. Also, President Trump is on a plane right now preparing to leave China for Vietnam. We'll continue to follow his trip across the continent of Asia. Stay tuned.
I wanted Democratic activists, rank and file Democrats. Those are the people I listen to. Those are the people that I respond to. I wanted them to know how hard we worked to elect Hillary Clinton and other Democrats up and down the ticket.
That was former DNC Chair Donna Brazile on this show last night. Brazile's new book has exposed a lot of what seems to be unseemly collusion between the Democratic National Committee and the Hillary Clinton for President campaign. While Brazile condemns that arrangement, she also insists it was legal, all of it. Cleta Mitchell has been around campaign and finance for a long time, and she's not so sure. She's an attorney and a campaign finance law expert, a Republican. Cleta Mitchell joins us tonight. So Cleta's campaign finance law is notoriously complex and confusing, even to people who have to deal with it for a living. So I'm uncertain exactly as to how this would be illegal. You know this area well. Tell us why you think this may have violated the law.
Well, let's start with the fact that the people on the Democratic side, the left, they want all these restrictions and limits on what parties can spend, what people can give, et cetera, et cetera. And the political parties are subject to strict limits on what they can give to their candidates and what they can spend in consultation or what we call coordination with their candidates.
Right.
And essentially what the Hillary Clinton campaign did in August of 2015 was it entered into a memorandum of understanding with the Democratic National Committee in which the Hillary for President campaign essentially took over control of the Democratic National Committee, entitling itself to all of the resources and the limits of the DNC. And those are supposed to be accounted for and allocated dollar for dollar to any candidate. But none of that happened. They did that as a contract, saying that Hillary Clinton's campaign was entitled to all of the research. They could control all the hiring. They would have access to all of the technology, the database, the voter database, et cetera, et cetera. Literally everything the Democratic National Committee was doing. They even moved the bank account of the DNC from Washington, where it had been for decades. I went back and looked, and actually it was the same bank account when Donna Brazile was the chair back in around 2000. They moved the bank account to the same bank in New York where Hillary Clinton's bank account was, and the treasurer of the joint fundraising committee that was set up between the DNC and the Hillary campaign was someone who was an employee of the Hillary Clinton campaign. It was control of the DNC with its higher limits by the Hillary Clinton campaign.
Have you ever seen anything like that before? I mean, is that, be honest, is that unusual in the middle of a presidential campaign?
Look, it's not unusual for a presidential campaign to have a lot of say in what the national party committees do after the nominee is chosen. That is not unusual, and that is actually customary. What's unusual about this is that it happened a year before Hillary Clinton was the nominee. And I think poor old Bernie Sanders was, I mean, here is Hillary Clinton literally controlling every single operational aspect of the DNC starting in 2015, in August, September of 2015. So he really didn't have a chance because they controlled the hiring of the communications director. They controlled everything. I have never seen that before. I've never seen anything like that
Staff
before,
that we now know sought to undermine the Bernie campaign. So, but back to the campaign finance question, are you saying that because of this contractual relationship between the campaign and the DNC, the campaign was allowed to, or was able to, exceed the caps on spending? That's the violation?
They exceeded the caps on spending, the coordinated expenditures. The parties are limited. Look, I don't believe in these limits. Let's be clear.
Right. No, I got it, but it's the law.
But it's the law, and McCain-Feingold in 2002 strengthened the prohibitions on coordinated activity between candidates and their parties, and so there are limits, there are restrictions. None of those costs were assessed against the Hillary Clinton campaign, and she controlled all of the expenditures, literally. So
why wouldn't, I mean, so what does that mean? So if what you're saying is right, and I know for a fact you know what you're talking about, what are the consequences for this?
Well, let me just say this. Any expenditure, any campaign finance violation involving $25,000 or more, if the activity was knowing and willful, and this was actually a Chuck Schumer amendment to the campaign finance law, that is a criminal violation. And the Department of Justice has jurisdiction to investigate. So I think both the FEC should investigate, and I think the Department of Justice should investigate. And one of the things I think is important to note here is that all of these people who call for all these restrictions, they apparently have no intention of abiding by them.
No, apparently not. And they're pretty open about it. Unfortunately, we're out of time. Cleta Mitchell, thank you. That was really interesting.
Thank you. Thank you.
Well, a group of illegal immigrants literally stormed onto Capitol Hill today to demand an illegal immigrant amnesty. Why does America seem intent on letting illegal immigrants flout the law? That's a great question. We'll address it next. Well, a literal horde of illegal immigrants stormed Capitol Hill today. Hundreds of illegal immigrants and their supporters assembled in the Hart Senate office building, very close to right here, chanting slogans in an effort to pressure Congress to disallow the deportation of people here illegally. Now, protesting inside the Hart building is against the law. Many of the protesters were students cutting school, and of course, an illegal immigrant participating in an illegal protest inside the U.S. is illegal on about 8 different levels. Nevertheless, only 15 arrests were made, and it seems unlikely anybody will be deported over this or ever for any reason, because we don't deport people in America. Howie Carr is a Boston area radio show host, and he joins us tonight. Howie, I mean, not to put too fine a point on it, but for people here illegally to show up and scream at elected American representatives about how they demand this, that, or the other thing, and then no one does anything about it, kind of tells you that the law is toothless now.
I couldn't agree with you more, Tucker. You know, I thought George Bush told us they were only doing the jobs that Americans won't do.
I remember.
But they all seem to get the day off from work. I was down in Washington last week, and they were having a demonstration across the street from the White House again during business hours on a weekday. And they're always having demonstrations up here in Boston at the State House all the time. Jeb Bush told us they're all valedictorians. As you said, they seem to be cutting a lot of classes. And John McCain and Lindsey Graham are always saying, oh, they're in the shadows. They don't look to me like they're in the shadows. You know,
it's just interesting. I mean, you had 60,000 Americans die last year of drug ODs. All of this started when a pharmaceutical company called Purdue Pharma pumped a bunch of poison into the middle of the country. Nobody, like none of the families of those dead people ever show up in Congress to protest or say anything. Do you know what I mean? I mean, there are a lot of people in America with legitimate grievances. Why are we paying so much attention to people who aren't even allowed to be here in the first place, who aren't citizens? I'm totally confused.
I don't get it either, Tucker. I mean, you know, you're right about these laws not being enforced. There was a song in the 60s, I Fought the Law and the Law Won.
Yes.
But it was done by Bobby Fuller IV. I think Bobby Fuller was an American because the illegal aliens always seemed to win. We had a case here in Massachusetts. The court system basically shopped for an illegal alien that they were going to make into a precedent, a poster boy for defying ICE, defying the federal authorities. So they found this guy. He was a Cambodian. He got cut loose on another technicality, but they said this young man, this illegal from Cambodia, can't be held for deportation by federal authorities. So they cut him loose. Well, guess what, Tucker? About a month after they cut him loose, this nice young man, illegal alien, career criminal from Cambodia, he's arrested again. He is charged with hitting an old lady in a wheelchair over the head and stealing $2,000 cash from her. And when the cops grabbed him, he said, well, I'm a junkie. I'm detoxing. I needed the money. And this was 6 months after a case you may have heard of before. They had a violent bank robber, an African, and he had done 2 bank robberies in downtown Boston. His public defender said, well, you know, if you throw the book at this guy, he's going to be deported. So they gave him a wrist slap sentence, 2 bank robberies, 9 months. And you could imagine what an American would have gotten. He does the time. He ends up doing 7 months. He gets out, and he almost immediately slits the throats, murders 2 anesthesiologists in South Boston. And by the way, Tucker, they happen to be legal immigrants themselves. I mean,
So really quickly, I guess what confuses me is I'm not arguing that only immigrants commit crime. Americans commit crime too. But when immigrants commit crime, the ruling class falls all over itself trying to pretend it didn't happen and makes excuses for it. Why is that? Where does that impulse come from?
I think it's just guilt, Tucker. Yeah. I think this goes back. This is the way it goes all the way back to the Immigration Reform Act of 1965 with Ted Kennedy, and somehow we had to I don't know, expunge our guilt. I don't feel any guilt. You know, people are you know, coming over here, and they have more rights as they arrive than American citizens do.
I don't understand it. It's such a great country. Why do the people who run it hate it so much and hate the people who live here so much? It's perverse. Howie, thank you, as always, for coming on. It's great to see you.
Thank you, Tucker.
Senate Republicans introduced their own tax plan today to compete with the House proposal. What's in it? Is it good for you? Is it good for the country? All of that with a sitting U.S. Senator next. The House GOP's tax reform plan cleared committee today, but then the Senate GOP released its own tax plan also today. That plan would preserve the estate tax, totally eliminate state and local tax deductions, and feature more overall tax brackets. Is the plan better or worse than the House plan? Does it change the priorities set out in the first one? Will it become law? Senator Tom Cotton is a Republican from Arkansas, of course, and he joins us tonight. Senator, thanks for coming on.
Thank you, Tucker.
So I think a lot of people are confused, want to believe it's a good thing, but are confused as to what the core point is. If you could name one, is it to increase the number of jobs? Is it to increase corporate profits? Is it to increase GDP? What's the main point of this?
Tucker, to me, tax legislation is about putting more money in the pockets of America's working families and our businesses. Ultimately, that creates more economic growth, which creates more jobs, and especially higher wages for working class Americans. So the Senate bill that was released today, I would say, is just different from the House bill. That's the way our system's supposed to work. The House and the Senate have different perspectives. We'll both pass the bill, hopefully, and then we'll resolve our differences. I think, though, that the bill will be better, whatever turns out on the particulars, if we do one thing, and that's repeal the individual mandate of Obamacare. That is the most hated part of Obamacare, and it would save $338 billion during the life of this tax bill. That can pay for a lot more tax cuts for our families and our businesses in a fiscally responsible fashion.
So you keep hearing that America's corporate tax rate is really high relative to other countries, and obviously that's true. But the number of companies, percentage that pay the full rate seems pretty small, and in fact, some companies get, tax subsidies. How would that change? Would the average corporation, do you think, under your plan, pay more or less per year under this?
So what I'd like to see is corporations and businesses of all types engaged in actual engineering to build real products to sell to customers as opposed to tax engineering. So one of our goals here is to reduce the corporate tax rate from the highest in the industrialized world down to 20%, which is also below the average of the industrialized world, but also eliminate a lot of the special interest deductions and loopholes they use to get down below the 35% rate today. I think most companies of all sizes would like that as well. Simply let them focus on the goods and the services that they provide to their customers as opposed to trying to game the tax system.
So if people stop gaming the tax system, that suggests to me that you would see corporate tax revenues rise.
I think in the long run, you will see revenues to the government rise because you see more economic growth. Again, this is the story of major tax legislation over the course of time. We all know that taxes impact our individual behavior, the decision to buy a home, for instance, or to invest in a green energy car under the Obamacare or under the Obama stimulus. So we all know that behavior changes when you pass tax laws. So what we want to do is pass a tax law that's going to let people make more of their own decisions, keep more of their own money. That generates more economic growth, which ultimately I think will generate more revenue.
Would there still be corporations that pay no effective taxes at all?
I hope not. That's not our goal. Our goal is to simplify the corporate tax code in a way that allows businesses to focus on business, not on taxes.
So you're going to get this line, I'm sure, a lot over the next couple of weeks. Why are you raising my tax? I'm not speaking for myself, but you'll hear this. Why are you raising my taxes but giving Apple, which is approaching $1 trillion market cap, a rate cut?
Well, our goal is to look at across the whole spectrum of the American families and businesses and try to make sure that anywhere on that spectrum, they're getting tax relief. Whether you're a big business, small business, whether you're young and single, whether you're older and you have a big family. That's the focus in terms of getting more money back into everyone's pocket. Again, there's a lot of particulars about this bill, but I think one easy way to do that, and especially one way to make sure that people who are in the working class are not paying higher taxes, is to repeal the Obamacare mandate, because it saves so much money, and it is itself a tax on people who, by definition, are working and working poor.
Last question, are you going to allow people to continue to deduct their medical expenses?
The Senate bill does allow that deduction to go forward. I think the Senate bill has a lot of reasonable...
what was that about? I don't understand. If you're a Republican, you don't want to penalize people for taking the responsibility themselves, do you?
Well, there's a lot of provision in the Senate bill that I support that maybe will be in the House bill by the time it crosses the House floor. For example, the medical deduction bill or the adoption tax credit. That's why I say this is a first step. It's a good step, but we can make
that. I mean, the Senate. I mean, that's going to stay in, right?
My understanding
Republicans wouldn't want to discourage adoption.
So my understanding is the House put that back in their bill today. Maybe I'm wrong about that. But I think in the final legislation, you'll see things like the adoption tax credit or the medical deduction, which are not big revenue raisers for the government, but are really vital to the families that depend on it.
Yeah, to the small percentage, but they're real.
Yeah.
Senator, thank you.
Thank you,
appreciate it.
Yeah, good to be on with you.
Up next, Final Exam. We corralled a couple of famous Fox News personalities to find out how much they know about the news. You'll see in a minute. Time now for Final Exam, where we find out which news personalities have been paying attention to the news. This week's contest pits a new Fox anchor against a longtime Fox correspondent. Shannon Bream hosts Fox News at Night, 11 p.m. Eastern, from this studio. Ed Henry, of course, is Fox's chief national correspondent. They join us tonight. Okay, contestants, Here are the rules. Now, let me just point out, by the way,
It is
Shannon is the
nerve-wracking, isn't
returning
it?
champion.
I'm not taking my hand off there.
2 in a row, win?
Yes.
Okay. This is a big deal, Ed. Not to increase it. So here are the rules. You put your hands on the buzzers. I'm going to ask the questions. The first one to buzz in gets to answer. You have to wait till I finish asking the question in order to do that. Each correct answer is worth 1 point. If you get it wrong, you lose a point. It's possible to get to the negative points. Best of 5 wins.
Why are you looking at me?
By the way, let me just say,
It's happened.
thanks to the generosity of the Fox News Channel, for the first time we now have prizes. The winner tonight gets the coveted mouth-breathing mug. Only here on Fox, yes.
Of all your
Right
expressions, that's my favorite
You like
one.
this one?
People
I'm going to
tweet
fight for it.
That after guests get that face, they've been tucked.
I like it.
Well, you can drink coffee at us. All right, ready? Question 1. Jurors at a Chicago courthouse yesterday got a big surprise when this person showed up to report for jury duty. Shannon Breen.
Former President Obama.
Former President Barack Obama, ladies and gentlemen, to the tape we go.
It's not every day the former leader of the free world shows up for jury duty.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody, for serving up the jury.
Can you imagine?
Cat-like reflexes serve
Oh,
you
she was
well.
good. She's fast.
That was
Give it like a
so
little
fast.
CPR.
That was
Oh my
unbelievable.
gosh, she had to have that one.
And she was right, too. All right, question 2. A complaint from the Pope himself. In St. Peter's Square this week, Pope Francis told churchgoers he wishes they were not attached to what? Ed Henry.
Money.
Money. Seems
Benjamins.
like a good, because it's easier for a camel to get through the eye of a needle, isn't it?
Than a rich man.
Did he say that? Exactly.
Pope Francis took issue with the use of phones during Mass, and he said, in part, it makes me very sad when I celebrate Mass here in the Piazza or the Basilica, and I see so many cell phones held up, not only by the faithful, but also by some priests and even bishops.
Money and cell phones, both evil.
The New Testament does not mention cell phones. But Ed, that was a great guess. Unfortunately, you're now in negative territory.
You got to move quick with Bream, or you're not.
The Shannon juggernaut continues. All right, a chance for redemption. Question 3. President Trump was embroiled in a controversy during his stop in Japan this week. Some called it a fake controversy. He was blasted for dumping a whole box of food into which kind of animal enclosure? Shannon Breen.
A koi pond.
A koi pond,
Your light is
says
going
Shannon
faster,
Breen.
Jim. What is it?
Not a llama enclosure, a koi pond. To the tape.
Later, Mr. Trump feeding Asian carp at a koi pond, first tossing spoonfuls of fish food before emptying the entire box.
That was the greatest video. He's like, forget it. You're getting everything.
That was so good. Did you know it was a
I
koi
knew the
pond?
answer, but I can't get anywhere.
It's a
You-
cat-like
she's just
reflexes.
too
It
fast.
is.
Hers,
I mean,
she's closer to the siren.
You should see her play blackjack. She can deal a 3-deck shoe. Oh, yeah,
Dealer's
with her
choice.
eyes closed. All right, question 4. And I know, Ed, you will know this. In an interview with Oprah this morning, what Democratic politician expressed regret he didn't run for president in 2016? Ed Henry.
Joe Biden.
Joe Biden. You're watching Oprah this morning and you say it's Joe Biden. To the tape.
I have a regret that I am not president
so, of course, he's going to.
because I think there's so much opportunity. I think America is so incredibly well positioned.
I was confused. I didn't know Oprah was still doing stuff.
Right.
But that was on
I
another
didn't
network,
either,
right?
but that's because you're not watching daytime television.
I am.
I'm busy.
No, he has a book coming out, so I figured he'd be
Makes
flacking
sense.
that. So it's either him or Donna Brazile.
Does
but I
Ricky
saw
Lake
Donna on
follow that?
Who's the
Lake
daddy?
is right. Maury follows it.
All right, fine.
That's who's the daddy. That's Maury.
You're up on it. All right. It's been a year and a day since the presidential election. Not everyone has come to terms with the man who won. Last night, anti-Trump protesters across the country gathered to lash out at the results in an unusual way. How did they do it? Ed Henry.
Looking in the sky and screaming helplessly.
I don't believe that. That's too crazy, but let's check the tape.
The president's critics marked the election night anniversary by screaming at the sky in frustration.
Frustration.
It can be very cathartic. cathartic.
I have to give it
right?
an assist. I think Greg Gutfeld did like a one more thing on that with the unicorn mug, and he said,
Screaming at the
"How ridiculous."
sky.
I have trouble believing that's real, but you were on the news, Ed. You were watching Oprah.
paying attention.
And the primal scream.
Though.
Unfortunately, it wasn't enough. A returning champion leaves once again the champion. No, the score is 2-1. Shannon Bream, Dad Henry, and Shannon, I want to congratulate you as the very first winner of the mouth-breathing mug.
It is my honor.
Thank you.
And I will drink many beverages out of it. Thank you. Are you trying to get my mug?
Thank you.
Great to see you both. That's it for this week's Final Exam. Pay attention to the news over the course of the week, and you can play along. Next edition, Thursday night next week. See you then. Quite a bit of political drama down in Alabama tonight. A Washington Post report published today claims that Republican candidate Judge Roy Moore, who's running for Senate to replace Jeff Sessions, repeatedly tried to initiate relationships with teenagers several decades ago. Most notably, the report claims that as a 32-year-old back from Vietnam, Moore kissed and fondled a 14-year-old girl at his home. More than a dozen Republican senators back in Washington have said that Moore must immediately step aside if those allegations prove true. Moore says they are not true, and he is sticking by that pretty emphatically. Moore's showdown with Democrat Doug Jones is scheduled for December 12th. Alabama officials say it's too late to remove his name from the ballot should he step aside. We're going to continue to follow this story, of course, as it develops. And before we go tonight, we're in the middle of investigating brand new video that we've obtained exclusively from the night of the Las Vegas massacre more than a month ago at Mandalay Bay. It gives a totally new perspective. We think it's really interesting. We're going to bring it to you tomorrow night. A lot of questions still there. That's about it for us tonight. Tune in every evening at 8 to the show that is the sworn enemy of lying, pomposity, smugness, and groupthink. DVR'd if you understand how those work. I don't. Good night from Washington. Sean Hannity up next from New York City. Hey, Sean.
Hey, Tucker. Thanks. Great show. Welcome to Hannity. This is a Fox News Alert.